From the old to the new, welcome to the show. I'm your host, Alex Chamwada, and this is the second and last segment of our two-part series, The Making of the Standard Gauge Railway, in which we are looking at the status of the construction of the new railway and the expected socio-economic benefits of the project.
The existing infrastructure, without a doubt, will tremendously change.
It means people can live further from Nairobi. Because we are saying even from Naivasha to Nairobi will take about 40 minutes.
So we are told phase one of the project, that is from Mombasa to Nairobi, will be completed by June 2017. Find out what happens thereafter.
We have already procured locomotives, wagons and coaches. They are currently under production.
That and more in the program, but first here are some key highlights about the project. The standard gauge railway will be 1.345 meters in width as compared to the old track, whose width is 1 meter. One of the commonly asked questions is, will it be electrified?
The provision for electrification is fully built in the entire rail. It's factored in. And actually even from Kenya Power, we've already started engaging with them in terms of the use of that power. So as they generate more power, they know that we might need that power.
The government argues electrification of the project would be costly and Kenya may not afford it for now.
The cost for electrification is about 20% of the total cost of the project.
But we believe that with the diesel traction that we have put in place, the line should be able to serve this country for the next 30 to 40 years.
In the making of the standard gauge railway, it costs about 400 million shillings per kilometer, with the government refuting claims that Kenya's line is much more expensive than other lines like the Ethiopian one.
Ours is class 1, and that's why you're seeing a lot more the piers, a lot more tunneling, a lot more bridges than what you'd call the class 2, which is mostly on the ground. And so the civil works for it is not as high, and that tends to be a bit cheap, a lot cheaper.
I think their cargo, the import-export cargo, their tonnage is much less than what we are dealing with from the port of Mombasa.
You are watching the making of the standard gauge railway. Let us now move on with the status of the project, and we begin from what is called Kilometer Zero. Kilometer Zero in Mombasa is where the standard gauge railway meets the port,
which is the area called the marshalling yard, where all these rails go into the port, and then the loading of the cargo into the freight trains will actually be happening at the level 0.
The fishermen who have been living in the nearby village that is known as Kempo village are being compensated for relocation.
Kijiji hichi kina watu hawakosi kama 500-600 hivi. Hatujui mambo yao wamefikia wapi, lakini lengo letu sisi ni kuwaomba watulipe haraka tupate kuondoka, tuwapishe nafasi yao waendelee na kazi yao badala kuwatatiza.
When we started off the project, the environmental and social impact assessment report did show that there are certain people who may not be landowners but are across the corridor whose livelihoods need to be protected. And our Constitution 2010, we are obligated while undertaking a project to make sure that the livelihoods of any persons affected by the project must be mitigated.
The laying of the track began in Mutito-Andei in Makueni County, right in the middle of the 472-kilometer stretch of phase 1 between Nairobi and Mombasa.
So far we have covered around 150 kilometers, which is we are now at around 94 kilometers from Mombasa, meaning that in a few days we'll have reached Mombasa. The other side we have another section which is based in Emali, and they're also doing the same work as we are doing. Right now they've done from Emali up to Mutito-Andei, meaning that they have joined to where we've started. So they have only been left with one section from Emali to Nairobi.
By April 2016, about 80% of the civil works had been completed, and of the 472 kilometers of the route, about 280 kilometers had been laid, according to the contractor.
Up to now, we have completed almost 64% of the overall project, which means we have completed most of the civil works, which including the subgrade, the bridge, the culverts. The work which remains is only track laying, stations, constructions, and SEC work, which we call the signaling, electricity, and communications.
The laying of the track has been made much easier by the use of track laying machines. There are 2 of them along the route. Besides the cranes, there are wagons along the route that are used to transport panels of rails that have been fitted on sleepers at the factories in Emali and Kathekani. Now, while at this section in Taita Taveta, we learned that each wagon, like that one, contains about 6 panels. One panel is about 25 meters long, and it takes about 3 minutes to lay one panel. There are 2 shifts working on this, the day shift and the night shift. Each shift lays about 2.1 kilometers. So it means in a day, they will have done about 4.2 kilometers.
Our section is divided by in section 6. The reason why we call it section 6, because we are the section who's doing the T-beam and sleepers only, and also we also do the truck laying.
There will be a total of 33 stations along the line, including 1 port station, 2 major passenger stations in Mombasa and Nairobi, and 7 intermediate passenger stations at Mariakani, Voi, Mtito Andei, Kibwezi, Emali, and Athi River. And there are those who have been asking, why did Kenya go for a single track instead of a dual track?
Because doing a dual track, 1 is very expensive, and 2, it is not necessary. But what you do when you develop a single track is that you ensure that it has sufficient number of loops. We call them crossing stations or looping stations. These stations, on this corridor we have about 23 of those. Those 23 stations are not for anything else. They don't receive passengers. They are only for operational purposes.
In the design, there will be control centers in Mombasa and Nairobi, and these will be the nerve centers for the train operations.
You can have 24 trains at the same time on the corridor, running both cargo and passenger in both directions. But because you have loops, then you are able to have trains moving off the loop, and it is automated. So the train doesn't even have to stop. It can just check out into the loop. The other train has passed on the main line and goes back into the main line.
Along the line, there will be 98 bridges covering 29 kilometers of the railway line.
We created 9 migratory paths. When you go to Savo, you'll see a whole bridge of just about 2 kilometers. The rest of the sections you'll find smaller bridges, none of which is less than 7 meters high, 70 meters wide, to make it possible for any kind of animal to be able to pass through the corridor. The government also provided sufficient resources to KWS, both as environmental restoration grant and for the security of the wildlife.
The line passes through 8 counties: Mombasa, Kilifi, Kwale, Taita Taveta, Makueni, Kajiado, and Nairobi.
Voi is going to have the 3rd largest railway station after Nairobi, Mombasa, and also being at the junction to northern Tanzania and Central Africa, Rwanda and Burundi, the Great Lakes countries, we see ourselves having an opportunity of creating a logistics hub in Voi that then can serve Taita Taveta County, can serve southern Makueni, can serve northern parts of Kwale, can serve southern parts of Kajiado County, can serve northern Tanzania, and also can serve Rwanda and Burundi.
It is argued that apart from job creation and technology transfer, the other benefits that the standard gauge railway brings include reduction in wear and tear of the roads, hence reduced road maintenance costs, as well as reduction in degradation of environment with less carbon emission from trains.
When you look at the number of trucks you have on the road, the amount of pollution, and compared to one train moving at 8 hours between Mombasa and Nairobi, ferrying what 108 trucks would do on the road, it tells you that the impact in terms of reduction of emission of carbon gases is significant.
Now, this is a case of congestion on the northern corridor. But the coming of the standard gauge railway is expected to help decongest the highway.
With the coming of the standard gauge, we are looking at an efficient transport system where the time it takes to move goods between Mombasa and Nairobi reduces from the 30 hours to a period of about 8 hours. And you're talking about one train ferrying 216 containers, which would equal about 108 trucks off Mombasa Road. When you look at the movement of passengers between Mombasa and Nairobi, for example, you will have the standard gauge railway being able to move 960 people in a corridor of 472 kilometers within 4.5 hours. That will be the fastest in the history of the country where 1,000 people have moved at such a speed in such a distance.
The existing infrastructure, without a doubt, will tremendously change the way business is done in this country and definitely benefit the economy. We have to bear in mind that, we operate currently from a non-existent railway system which is totally unreliable and does not work. And in June next year we'll have a fully functioning system that will contribute to massive movement of goods and opportunities along the railway line, the 5 stations.
Itatusaidia sana kupunguza gharama ya products mbalimbali ambazo Kenya hutumia. Kwa sababu kitu kimoja ambayo chatusumbua sisi kama Wakenya ni gharama ya kutoa mizigo yetu kutoka Mombasa kuja mpaka Nairobi.
You are watching the making of the standard gauge railway. More in the program right after the break.